The Mummy's Curse. Deep in the scorching sands of the desert, far from the hustle and bustle of cities and human roots, lay a tomb that resembled a silent guardian of forgotten times. Its majestic mystery was covered by centuries-old layers of sand that seemed to protect it from prying eyes. Almost no one remembered it, and only fragments of ancient legends from the whispers of the old inhabitants of Egypt reminded of its existence. This tomb was something more than just a resting place of past eras. It became part of myths that spoke of an incomprehensible curse imposed on anyone who dared to violate its inviolability. Its silence seemed to warn of danger, and its oblivion only increased the fear of the unknown. Legends depicted the tomb as a gateway to another world, to a place where the past could break out. Once upon a time, when the pharaohs ruled Egypt, a powerful priest devoted to the gods swore to protect the tomb from the hands of uninvited guests. His name had been forgotten by history, but his deeds have left an indelible mark on legends. The priest possessed deep knowledge of magic and spiritual powers, and he was revered as a mediator between the worlds of the living and the dead. According to legend, the priest performed a secret ritual, turning to the gods for help. In the dark depths of the temple, he offered sacrifices and uttered a spell that was supposed to make the tomb inviolable. The curse he imposed was not only words, but also a fusion of magical power and the will of the gods. It obliged anyone who disturbed the peace of the tomb to face a terrible punishment, eternal torment and persecution. Legend has it that the priest gave his life for this ritual, becoming the eternal guardian of the tomb. His spirit, it is said, is forever tied to the place, and he ruthlessly fulfills his task, protecting the peace of the ancient dead. Since then, the tomb has become synonymous with mystery and fear, a warning to anyone who dares to disturb the forgotten past. For many years, a team of archaeologists has tirelessly explored the desert, spending time and energy studying ancient texts and searching for traces of forgotten civilizations. They were led by a famous scientist, an ambitious and passionate researcher, for whom each artifact found was not only of historical value, but also a path to unraveling the past. Their work seemed fruitless until one day, in a dusty pantry of an ancient temple, a parchment was found. This document, yellowed by time, was covered with strange symbols and ancient writings. After hours of careful analysis, the team realized that they had more than just a relic. It was a map that led to the location of a mysterious tomb mentioned in legends. This unexpected find inspired the archaeologists and made them hurry. The discovery of the parchment was a turning point in their journey, promising to lead them to the goal they had dreamed of for so long. They realized that there was more ahead than they could have imagined. Months of intense excavation had become a test of endurance and perseverance for the team of archaeologists. Under the scorching desert sun, they had worked their way through thousands of years of sand and stone, day after day. Their efforts seemed futile as their tools touched only empty sands, and the traces of parchment seemed increasingly hazy. Then, one fateful day, one of their shovels came across something solid. It looked like a stone, but its shape and location made the team pause. They continued to dig cautiously, and gradually the entrance to the mysterious tomb appeared before their eyes. The entrance was framed by massive stones carved with symbols whose meaning at first remained a mystery. The symbols were carved with such care that it seemed as if the gods themselves had worked on them. They radiated some special aura, as if warning of what lay beyond them. Some of the team felt a vague sense of awe and hesitation as they stood before this ancient masterpiece. But for the archaeologists, it was not only a triumph, but also a moment when history began to come alive before them. The archaeologists' first steps into the tomb revealed a world that seemed forgotten by time itself. The air was thick and stagnant, filled with the smell of damp and decay. The ceiling of the tomb towered above them, framed by bizarre frescoes and ancient symbols that shimmered in the light of their lanterns. The walls of the tomb were more than just a surface. They became a canvas for the history left by the ancient masters. The frescoes depicted scenes of sacrifice, stern-eyed gods who judged people, and dead souls falling into oblivion. The symbols warned of the terrible punishment that would befall those who disturbed the peace of this sacred abode. The colors, though faded by time, retained their formidable power, as if calling everyone to think before continuing their journey. The further the team moved forward, the more tense the atmosphere became. The unknown consumed them, and the drawings on the walls seemed to come to life, warning of what might await in the depths. This place was not just a tomb, but a portal to a world where secrets and dangers merged together. Carefully moving further into the tomb, the archaeologists entered a wide, solemn room that shimmered in the light of their lanterns. Gold, lots of gold, and jewels covered the floor and stone altars. Statues of gods inlaid with precious stones froze in noble poses, as if watching the team's every step. The brilliance and richness of the room were breathtaking, but none of the archaeologists dared to touch these treasures, feeling an invisible force that suggested that all this carried something more than just material value. But amidst this brilliance, something else caught the attention of the team: a giant sarcophagus in the center of the room. It was covered with mysterious magical symbols and writings that seemed to pulse with some ancient energy. The stone from which the sarcophagus was carved seemed timeless, as if it had been created not by human hands, but by forces beyond comprehension. The inscriptions, although faded, radiated an invisible threat, as if warning of a peace that could not be disturbed. The team moved closer, trying to make out the details. The scientists exclaimed with delight that these writings could contain the secret of the curse, or the key to the riddles they had been searching for years. However, a slight chill that suddenly permeated the air seemed to announce that they were only on the threshold of something much greater than they had expected. One of the archaeologists, examining the sarcophagus in the center of the room, noticed a small depression on its surface. It looked like part of a mechanism, anciently engraved in the stone. Moved by curiosity, he carefully touched it with his fingers. At that moment, the tomb froze, as if time itself had stopped moving. Suddenly, low and drawn-out sounds were heard, similar to the groaning of the earth itself. The stone under the sarcophagus trembled, and the heavy slabs began to slowly shift. Grains of sand fell from the walls, revealing additional frescoes that depicted scenes with magical rituals. The symbols around the sarcophagus began to glow with a dim red light, as if lit by the power of awakening. The archaeologists stared in bewilderment at what was happening, but it was too late to change anything. A dull sound was heard from the sarcophagus, and its lid slowly slid open, revealing a gloomy, dark void inside. The mummy, wrapped in ancient bandages, began to move. Its eyes, similar to embers, glowed with an ominous flame, and from its chest came a deep roar that seemed inhuman. The mechanism, triggered by a random movement, awakened a creature that had remained dormant for centuries. The archaeologists realized that they had touched something they should not have, and that now the curse would not leave them without consequences. After awakening, the mummy immediately manifested its unprecedented power. Its movements were slow, but its every radiation carried danger. It seemed that the desert itself obeyed its will. Archaeologists watched in horror as the sand began to churn, forming hurricanes that circled around the mummy, as if carrying out its orders. The walls of the tomb, which had stood immovable for centuries, now trembled and broke from the powerful force of the storm. The air became heavy and filled with the smell of decay and dust. The mummy seemed to have complete control over this chaos, causing sandstorms that left no chance of escape. Her voice, guttural, deep and ominous, echoed throughout the tomb, announcing eternal doom to the trespassers. As the archaeologists tried to escape to the surface, the desert storms began to threaten them from the outside as well. The wind was so strong that the unfortunate people could barely stand on their feet. The mummy, standing in the middle of the dust whirlwinds, seemed to grow in its power, demonstrating absolute mastery over the elements. Its curse haunted everyone who stepped into the tomb, reminding them that no effort would allow them to escape its punishment. Taken by surprise by the chaos and power of the awakened mummy, the archaeologists understood that their lives depended on their ability to unravel the secrets of the tomb. The walls, covered in ancient writings and frescoes, could contain clues or even a way to stop this terrible creature. Exhausted but full of desperate determination, they rushed to read the symbols, illuminating them with lanterns. "This is some language of an ancient priestly cult," the scientist whispered, carefully examining the engraved texts. The group began to work together, translating the words and trying to understand the meaning. Their knowledge of the ancient texts became their only defense against the threat that grew closer with each passing minute. However, time was not on their side. The mummy approached, and its curse grew, causing new sandstorms and ominous sounds that destroyed any hope of peace. Their hands trembled, and their hearts beat like drums as they deciphered each symbol, knowing that each mistake could be their last. One of them suddenly exclaimed, "This spell, it grants protection, but there is also a ritual of cancellation." The rest held their breath, trying to decipher the last elements of the text, until the monstrous figure of the mummy stopped right next to it, ready to strike the final blow. The archaeologists, faced with a supernatural threat, acted desperately, trying to use every possible means to protect themselves and stop the mummy. One of them rushed to the wall, covered in symbols, hoping to find a spell or ritual there that could neutralize its power. In his hands trembled notes with translations of the text, but every attempt to understand the inscriptions came up against the chaos caused by the noise of sandstorms and the mummy's guttural roar. The other members of the team tried to barricade the door to the room, hoping to distance themselves from the creature. They used stones, tools, even fragments of the sarcophagus. But this did not deter the mummy, who seemed to ignore any physical barriers. With each step she took, obstacles were broken, and her sinister silhouette grew closer. Some of the archaeologists tried to escape deeper into the tomb, looking for an alternative exit. They ran through narrow corridors, but sandstorms, controlled by the mummy, pursued them, blocking the paths. In one of these corridors, an archaeologist stumbled upon an ancient mechanism, hoping that activating it would stop the creature. But instead of saving it, the mechanism only increased the chaos, opening new passages and releasing more dust. The team also tried to distract the mummy with the light of lanterns, placing them in such a way as to make the creature perceive the light as a threat. But its eyes, flickering with an ominous flame, were indifferent to these tricks. With each passing minute, their hopes faded and fear filled the tomb, turning every step into a fight for their lives. Their voices mingled with the mummy's roar, and each of them realized that their efforts were doomed to failure. This was a clash with something greater than human knowledge and capabilities. Their unsuccessful efforts turned into an act of desperation, an attempt to postpone the inevitable. Every member of the team fought to the last, but one by one they fell to its relentless attacks. Only a few archaeologists were able to escape to another room, but even there they were not safe. The mummy seemed to know every corner of the tomb and pursued them with relentless determination. The last member of the team, barely restraining his panic, made his way through the dark corridors of the tomb. His feet stepped heavily on the stone floor, covered with dust and sand, which rose into the air with each step. Behind him was the ominous roar of the mummy, which did not let go of its prey, and the walls vibrated from its unquenchable power. The archaeologist realized that the chances of salvation were almost zero, but his gaze suddenly stopped on a fragment of an ancient artifact, a part of the sarcophagus, which he had accidentally touched during the fight. The stone was covered with magical inscriptions, similar to those that adorned the walls of the tomb. It is not known why, but this piece seemed to him the key to solving the curse. Gathering the last of his strength, he grabbed the artifact and rushed to the exit. The sandstorm outside the tomb, controlled by the mummy, was so powerful that it seemed as if the desert itself was trying to hold him inside. He fell, rose, fought his way through the whirlwinds until finally he reached the surface. At dawn, exhausted and full of fear, the archaeologist found himself outside the deadly tomb, clutching a fragment of the artifact in his hand. Now he knew that he carried with him not only his salvation, but also a curse that would become a part of his life from now on. Amidst despair and pain, he decided that he would find the answer, unravel the secrets of this artifact, even if it took all his time and strength. The life of the surviving archaeologist seemed to never return to normal after he left the tomb. At first, this manifested itself in small but disturbing events. He constantly felt that someone was watching him, even when he was alone. His hearing was failing him. He often heard whispers that resembled ancient curses echoing from the dark corners of his house. Strange misfortunes began to accompany him at every step. Things that had been working just a few hours before broke, important papers disappeared without a trace, and he himself began to suffer from inexplicable attacks of weakness. Every time he fell asleep, he would dream of scenes from the tomb, sandstorms, darkness, and a mummy slowly approaching him, its eyes glowing with ominous fire. But the scariest thing was that sometimes he would notice the silhouette of the mummy in the mirror, in the shadow of the door, or simply in the corners of his vision. Its image was fleeting but real, enough to make his heart clench with fear. The archaeologist began to lose his peace and sleep, constantly looking around and feeling the presence of something sinister. When the last surviving archaeologist returned to civilization, his story eventually became known to the general public. The media picked up the news of the tomb's curse, and the details of this terrible adventure spread around the world. People were stunned and fascinated by the idea of a mysterious curse on the mummy, which haunts those who dared to disturb its peace. The legend turned into a real sensation, and the tomb, a symbol of untouchable danger, World governments, fearing the risks to new archaeologists and adventurers, decided to declare the tomb a closed area. Excavations were prohibited, and access to the tomb was blocked by increased security and legal sanctions. However, even such measures could not deter those who coveted the legendary treasures. Treasure hunters, full of lust for wealth and fame, began to devise ways to penetrate the tomb, ignoring prohibitions and warnings. Some of these treasure seekers disappeared into the desert, leaving no trace behind. Others returned empty-handed, telling terrifying stories of sandstorms that seemed to have consciousness or of strange sounds coming from the depths of the desert. However, the legend, instead of fading away, only became more intriguing, causing new waves of interest. The tomb became a symbol of mystery and a warning against human greed. The legend of the mummy's curse lived on, warning anyone who decided to challenge the ancient powers.